What's up, everybody? Sorry for being so late with this video. I wasn't able to see Incredibles 2 until a few days ago due to my own incompetence, but not anymore. Anyway, it was worth the wait. You see, I'm a really big fan of the first Incredibles movie, which is probably why I should have seen it sooner. As a kid, I loved it because I thought it was amazing, and, well, it's not like as a kid I had a really advanced way of looking at movies when I watched them. It was cool. I liked it. And now I love it for a very different reason. It's a charming and incredibly unique movie. Like most of the Pixar films, the characters look human but have exaggerated proportions, such as narrow or drawn-out faces, small and rectangular noses, or diminutive statures. But all the characters live in a world mirroring ours during the mid-20th century, but with some notable differences such as computers, color TV, and an overall more modern society. So you got these characters living in a real world. It's like most Pixar movies, but it's different because of the 60s aspect. It's kind of like The Iron Giant, which was also directed by Brad Bird. The aesthetic of the time it's set lends the movie to being better than its peers. And again, in that same vein, it's kind of similar to Fallout, in the sense that it takes the design aesthetics from the mid-century and dashes in new tech, except in the case of Incredibles, it's not. Everything's powered by a nuke, and nothing is all that much more advanced than our own current tech with the exclusion of supervillains or superheroes. The music as well is a big part of the aesthetic. It and the animation are the two biggest reasons why I think Incredibles is a goddamn masterpiece. It takes so many unique aspects and parts about the movies from the 70s and 60s that were good into this relatively modern version of it. Sadly, so much of what was incredible about The Incredibles fails to show up in Incredibles 2. The opening scene for The Incredibles is one of my favorite openings of all time, and I'll still watch it now and not fail to be amused and absolutely love it. It perfectly encapsulates the aesthetic and creative vision that Brad Bird had for it 14 years ago, and 14 years later, nearly all that character is gone. I don't think that Incredibles 2 is an affront to The Incredibles. It's just painfully clear that when you watch them back to back, they're very different movies with very different aesthetics, despite taking place mere minutes after one another. Brad Bird still very clearly, deeply cares about the franchise, but his execution of it is far less tactful than the way it was done in the first. Incredibles 2 still has some of the mid-century feel, but it also has too much of a focus on a modern world, and because of that, the costumes look foolish in those scenes. Having someone wear a skin-tight suit with long black gloves and boots, or a white and blue full body suit, works in the 60s aesthetic of the first. Look at Watchmen, it worked there. But the moment you put these characters in a realistic looking modern room, not a supervillain lair, not a superhero lair, just a normal looking room from the 21st century, these designs feel very out of place. Now, the gripe is more of one that comes from me being such a big fan of the first instead of ruining the movie. It just makes it feel more like a generic Disney Pixar film without that charm. I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as I can, but I will have a spoiler segment with a warning as usual. Put simply, the story for Incredibles 2 is by and large a pile of stinky dog shit. There are parts where it's very good, where I'm really enjoying the hell out of it, and it still maintains the plot, it just fails to generate the same interest as the first. And then there's parts where I think bashing my head in is better. I think it has a lot to do with the villain, which I'll get into in a bit. Incredibles 2 picks up right after the first one ends, and the first bit is really good. The first act is amazing. It's as fun and charming as The Incredibles. But the second act stumbles over itself trying to feign complexity, and the third captures the similar feel to the last act of the first one, but it does not compare. It's similar, but it's not at all the same. It has a good story, don't get me wrong, it's just disappointing that it's so generic. Of course, I'm holding out my bigger disappointment for Wreck-It Ralph 2. That thing's gonna fucking suck. So, there's two ways of looking at it. One, from the perspective of it is a sequel, which is the right way. Or two, viewing it as its own movie, wholly disconnected from the first. From the perspective of number one, it's not that good. From the perspective of number two, don't use number two. You're just viewing it wrong. Alright, so spoiler time, because the plot really can't properly be shat on without spoiling stuff, so be warned. However, I will say that the plot is very transparent when you see the movie, so I don't know how much of what I'm going to say will ruin it that wouldn't naturally be ruined while watching it. Alright, here we go. For the sake of my argument's stability, instead of people just picking at the minute aspect of me comparing things too much, I'm gonna throw out the aesthetic and way the first was made that made it so good, and let's just view each antagonist. Let's just view one characteristic, something that you could do with any two franchises. We're just comparing the first one and the second one. In Incredibles, we have Syndrome. We see his childhood and how the rejection from Mr. Incredible shaped his perspective of the world, leading an already genius boy to become a maniac genius man, perfecting a super weapon. His whole goal is centered around his own betterment and then lowering the status of supers. In the sequel, the villain is Evil Endeavor. They really beat us over the goddamn head with the fact that she's evil. Syndrome at least hides behind the scenes, and while his name definitely is a reference, it's not as incredibly transparent as Evil Endeavor. And while repeating for this probably would have had less impact, it's even less impactful with a character whose name is literally Evil Endeavor turns out to be the villain. From the moment Evil Endeavor is introduced to us, it's clear that she's the villain. Her brother gathers Frozone, Mr. Incredible, and Elastigirl after their near defeat of the Underminer, and he tells them that he wants to make them legal again. Meanwhile, Evelyn shows up, and we don't really learn anything about her other than that she's a genius and, like, really good at technology. All of the other characters, so we're clear, have relevancy to the plot. She is the only one that's just there. And it's an animated movie. They don't make characters that don't have relevancy. Everyone has a reason for being there. They don't just cast an extra and then forget about them. It's a slap in the face that they'd go from Syndrome to a trope-filled character whose name is a shitty pun. But I know this is gonna piss some of you off, so even separating the entirety of Incredibles from this one, Evelyn is still a bad villain, and her reveal and hints to her true motives are dealt with about as much subtlety as Quentin Tarantino's foot fetish. Now, I normally find issue with relatively minor things in regards to villains. This is an exception. This is a fucking massive issue. It'd be like watching Harry Potter and Dumbledore just keeps saying, "Ho ho, Harry, you're driving me wild. I might just have to jump off the roof." Ho 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 ho. I don't know why I imagine laughing like Santa. Evelyn isn't just poorly executed, but her entire goal is a major plot hole. Her brother Winston, after recruiting the heroes, sends Elastigirl to fight crime to show that supers are needed, now more than ever. So while she's fighting crime, of which she only does 3 times before the law changes, those 3 are all about what Evelyn's alter ego, the Screenslaver, is doing solely for the purpose of making superheroes legal to then make them illegal. It's a fucking mindfuck. It's a pretty big plot hole. So if her goal really is to make sure supers don't come back, then why the fuck would she help her brother, only to then stop doing that? It could be argued that she's doing it to kill her brother and take his company, but she never says that's her goal. Matter of fact, she says she doesn't want to do that. Her only goal is to make supers illegal after they're about to be made legal. It's the biggest plot hole I've ever seen. Like, what the fuck is she doing? She's the only reason the problem she has is actually happening. Otherwise, Elastigirl would just be stopping people from muggings and stealing stuff from pizza places. If she didn't do this shit, then supers wouldn't have had a big villain to show that they need to be made legal again. Brad Bird did run into issues during production though, which resulted in his original ideas being completely thrown out and then the date of the movie being moved up a year. So it's partly on the studio. He still wanted to do what he did the first time, but he wasn't able to do it very well. The studio affected what he did, but he still came up with this. I feel like there would be better ways to do it instead of naming the character Evil Endeavor and her entire motive being one she created and is aware she created. It's fucking weird. Anyway, there's a lot of good parts to the story of Incredibles. The storyline with Mr. Incredible and the kids is good. I felt like the Elastigirl parts were good for the most part, and it's not because she was thick. But the new heroes introduced, the aforementioned plot hole the size of fucking Australia, and the overall ass of a villain they used made it a disappointing and sad plot. The animation in The Incredibles from 2006 is and was amazing. The animation in Incredibles 2 is beyond amazing. It's fucking incredible. As I said, a lot of the characters look human, but with inhuman characteristics like the other Pixar films. And it's wild to see in 2018. The powers with one character in particular who uses lightning was just so fucking cool. The lightning was actual bolts that were animated. You know the ones you draw as a kid where, you know, you draw line up, line, whatever. You know the fucking thing you drew as a kid? Yeah, it's like that. And it's great. It's so cool to see this artistry behind such a very simple thing, or they could have just bowed out. They could have just made it, you know, it's just sparks, you know, just. I'm gonna hope I'm probably putting some example on screen and that I didn't just go and show nothing. That'd be embarrassing. And even in the lax parts of the movie where the story is so plain, it's still fun to see the way that it's done. And of course, the suit scene with Edna was as great as the first. It was amazing. The voice acting was impeccable. It was really good. The artistic style was lost for much of the movie in terms of the animation and setting, but it still captures the feeling and emotions of the first in its soundtrack, while still introducing brand new tracks. It does a much better job of mixing soundtracks than Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman sucked in that front. Incredibles 2 is pretty great. It's a pretty fun sequel, and it's pretty neat to finally find out what happened after the end of The Incredibles. Disappointing, but it's good to finally know. I still think the first is better, and that's what it really comes down to. Incredibles 2 just isn't as good as the first. It's a mostly competent movie, excluding the ass-tainted excuse for complex villain they tried to make, and I liked it. I think you'll like it too. I give it a 7, which is an average score in my opinion. The plot has a fucking major issue, but everything else was incredible. If it were any other movie that didn't have this level of animation, I would definitely rate it lower, but it is kind of like with Isle of Dogs. The animation level is so great you can forgive things. Although Isle of Dogs is perfect, so go see Isle of Dogs as well. I'd like to see a sequel. Same as when I saw The Incredibles, but with what they did, especially with the ending of the movie, I don't think any new sequels would even remotely be able to capture the same charm as the first, and that this did for the most part. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and if you liked the video, make sure to leave a like and comment what you thought of it, and what stuff you'd like to see me talk about next. Make sure to subscribe to see more content like this in the future, and hit that bell icon to turn on notifications. And it's summertime, so I, like any good YouTuber, am going to chill myself out, because it works for Logan Paul, so why not hop on that bandwagon? I have merch. Buy my merch. I personally recommend the premium tee option. It's as comfortable as wearing a cloud, and if t-shirts aren't your thing, don't worry. We've got sweatshirts, hoodies, mugs, and plenty more. Link for that and everything else you need is in the description below. And I'm gonna try and put a video out next week, but I'll be busy, very busy throughout the week, and if I can't, I'll probably just stream every day that week. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check those out. Any updates on that will be on my Twitter. So yeah, thanks for all the support, and as always, I'll see you in the next video. If you'd like to have your art featured in a video, draw me or one of my wondrous characters, such as the majestic Chad the Sad, and tweet it to @TahukanTV on Twitter. Huge thank you to Patreon supporters Anonymous and Matt Porter. I really appreciate it.